This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. Hi. What do you guys want to talk about? This is such good shit. Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Just one of those weeks. Stay stoic, people. It'll keep you sane. That is the entirety of that conversation. I will not go into any more detail. You put two and two together from there. Now, we're here this week on the Five Starr Wrestling Report for some classic pro wrestling talk. At least that's what I think we're here to do. Sometimes I even have to question myself. What day is it? I've had a couple of those moments in the last 7 days. No, I know it's Friday. Which means we've got NWA World Championship Wrestling, Midsouth Wrestling, and World Class Championship Wrestling to talk about. The regular Friday format, so to speak. I'll talk a little bit about what's going on over the weekend at the end of the show, but for now, it is status quo BAU, business as usual. And I guess we'll go ahead and just dive into things. I don't really have any work-related horror stories to talk about. All I do is just the fact that nobody cares, and figure I'll just save everybody the trouble. Now, we'll complain about some of the stuff that happened on Crockett TV this week, and hopefully that'll make up for it. Not that the show was horrible. In fact, far from it. Especially when we come to talk about that TV main event feature. Holy cow. Talk about an unexpected twist. So we are at the Richmond Coliseum for Superstars in the Superstation this week. And they're doing the final hard sell for the 88 Bunkhouse Stampede on pay-per-view, which I believed aired the following night. Again, that was the event they tried to run head-to-head with the WWF Royal Rumble. He got smoked in their efforts. Second time a WCW pay-per-view event was run head-to-head with a WWF event. And they got profoundly humbled. You know, it wasn't until the 88 Clash of Champions in a couple months where we saw a little bit of a turnaround there. Strike two. But, yeah, that was the big selling point for the show. Along with their TV main event of Tully Blanchard versus Barry Windham, which we will certainly discuss in a little bit. We were also back to the three-man booth this week with David riding shotgun. Actually, I don't even know if we could call it shotgun. He got the back seat behind shotgun. There's a name for that. I forget what it is. But now JR was still the main color guy this week with Tony. And again, they taped this from the Richmond Coliseum. So we were back to a more hot crowd setting, as opposed to the lukewarm TV studio setting from Atlanta. And this seems to be a common recurring pattern with their taping schedule. They've been doing more frequent syndicated TV tapings outside Atlanta, definitely trying to branch out more. And, I mean, I'll say it's definitely helped in giving the show a livelier presentation. Even for matches that had no business being as hot as they were. Take the Rock and Roll Express versus Cougar Jay and Tommy Angel, for example. And we've already established that the Rock and Roll were mentally checked out by this point in 88. I mean, they were all but half-assing it in the ring. Didn't make a damn bit of difference to those Virginia fans. They were all about the rock and roll here. Now, of course, they're selling the match between them and the Sheep Herders for the Bunkhouse Stampede. A match, for the record, that never takes place. Because as we've been talking about with Ricky and Robert over the last several weeks, I mean, they had pretty much given their notice like a day or two before the actual Bunkhouse pay-per-view aired. Can't even remember what the actual match ended up being. I know the Sheep Herders were on the card, but there was never like any explanation for why the match with Ricky and Robert never happened. They just swept it under the rug. And nothing to see here, folks. We were never promoting the Sheep Herders versus the Rock and Roll. What planet are you guys living on? So I believe this might have been the last time we see Ricky and Robert as a tag team on Crockett TV until sometime in like early to midsummer. I know they come back for a little period, but man, what a way to go out for the time being. Some nice little maneuvering and baseball slide duck unders, and then boom, double drop kick to Tommy Angel. And then it's sayonara to Ricky and Robert as they give Jim Crockett the big middle finger on their way out the door. From there, we cut to ringside with Michael Hayes for an interview. And he's basically talking about the fact that he and Gorgeous Jimmy are sick of not living up to their word of taking down the Horsemen. Unfortunately, Hayes was not able to get Garvin to come to the show today. He and Precious were on assignment at home. But Hayes traveled to Richmond so he could give the Horsemen a piece of his mind. And he basically vowed that they were going to deprive the Horsemen of everything because they're watching as Luger continues to throw a monkey wrench into their master plan. And pretty soon Garvin and Hayes are going to take advantage and take the world tag titles from Tully and Arn when they least expect it. By the way, when I say on assignment, people, don't overthink it. We all know what Jimmy Garvin and Precious were doing at home. I mean, it's tax season after all. Obviously, they were getting their paperwork in order, like law-abiding citizens. So then we come back for Sting versus Gladiator number 1. This was the point in the program where the crowd pans were way out of control, and we were only 10 minutes in by this point. It was like a WWE show. Like every 8 seconds, they just had to keep filming random shots of the crowd and completely detracted from the match. Not that there was a whole lot to report on. It was Sting killing a gladiator. I did very much enjoy the part where Sting had him in a face lock on the mat, and someone had yelled for Sting to rip the mask off. So Sting yells right into the floor cam, "He's too ugly for that." Good retort. And the ending was great. As Gladiator goes to fire up out of the corner and catch Sting with a lariat, not only does Sting shrug it off, but then he immediately hits Gladiator with a dropkick, sets him up for the Stinger Splash in the corner, and then he submits him with a Scorpion. By the way, that all happened in about 4 seconds. Everything I just ran down there. At which point, Sting gets on the microphone with Tony Schiavone, and he immediately calls out Ric Flair so he can feel the Scorpion. And because this was super green Steve Borden, who barely knew shit from apple butter about what he was doing, as Tony continues to hold the mic, so Sting could continue his promo, the only thing we mainly get out of the Stinger from that point is, and I quote, "Oh! Come on, Rick, let's go. Oh! I can feel it." He was definitely feeling something. A raging boner, perhaps. But still, I mean, we're only a couple of months out from the performance of a lifetime. It's amazing to see the progress Sting has made in just a short window. And he's catching more and more fire as the weeks go by. And especially in these larger venues with these packed crowds, you can really hear it. So then we came back for Ivan Koloff and the Warlord versus Mark Fleming and Bob Riddle. It was hideously boring. But as I was watching this and listening to more of the commentary as they're hyping up the bunkhouse card, it took me until this segment to figure out what the actual world title match was for the Bunkhouse Stampede. Now let's think about this for a minute. For most of the month of January, who's been cutting promos on Ric Flair laying out world title challenges, aside from Sting? The answer is Michael P.S. Hayes. For most of January, who have the Road Warriors primarily been feuding with? Well, the answer is Paul Jones and the Powers of Pain. And in fact, they're still selling the bench press contest for the 30th between both teams. So with that in mind, can you venture a guess as to what the scheduled world title match was for the Bunkhouse Stampede at the Nassau Coliseum? The World Heavyweight title match is Ric Flair defending against Hawk. What? So, of course, that begs the question, well, what's Michael Hayes doing at the pay-per-view? Well, the answer was not being booked on the card at all. What the fuck is going on here? I'm like Joe Biden standing at the podium trying to do a press conference. I can't explain what the fuck's happening here. So the title match was not Ric Flair versus Michael Hayes? Even though the past 4 to 5 weeks has been pretty much nothing but devoted to that build? How did we get from Michael Hayes cutting promos on Ric Flair challenging him to the world title to Ric Flair defending the world title against Hawk of the Legion of Doom? Oh, and for the record, just in case you think it couldn't get any more wacky, the Powers of Pain were booked inside the Bunkhouse cage match. Not as partners, but as opponents. A match that was then won by Dusty. All right. I've given up. Yeah, these people have completely lost the plot. And in case you care, Ivan and Warlord went over here with a backbreaker axe handle combo. And no, I have no explanation for why the Barbarian was not the Warlord's partner this week. Nor can I really account for where he was during this segment. My guess would be hanging out in the jungles of Laos. So then we had Ric Flair and J.J. Dillon with David Crockett after our Spam Slam of the Week advertisement, which Beautiful Bobby was the sponsor for. And now Flair is basically here to respond to Sting's comments from a bit ago. And JJ chimed in too. He talked about the fact that when guys like to push their weight around and come charging at the champion, the Horsemen are right there with a fly swatter to slap those men back down to size. And when it comes to the Stinger, the circumstances are no different. At which point, Flair gets on the mic, and he immediately starts comparing Sting to guys like Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson. And at the direct moment he began mentioning little girls in training undergarments. I thought, oh no. I'm having PTSD flashbacks to 1986 all over again. The countless multiple times that Ric Flair would go out on television and talk about little girls in training underwear. It's like every fucking Ric Flair promo for like 8 months straight. And in fact, probably some of the creepiest promo material I've ever heard from the Nature Boy. Think about the ground that covers. But he very quickly got off that subject and started doing a bunch of bunkhouse plugs. Just kind of being the corporate bulletin board and advertising the event one more time. My guess is that ticket sales were not doing all too well. Or they were just really trying to push the pay-per-view concept. Well, it still flopped. But he promised that in addition to him embarrassing and humiliating Hawk, Tully and Arn were going to take home the bacon inside the cage match and then prove why they are the three major world champions of the NWA. And then he promised the girls that none of them will be first, but a whole lot of them can be next. And that took us to the Sheepherders versus Trent Knight and Larry Stevens, which was ungodly atrocious and the most painfully long 5-minute squash of all time. Did anyone ever notice that Trent Knight looks like Magnum TA if Magnum had lost every bit of muscle mass in his body? I don't know. I wrote absolutely nothing else down aside from my comments about the match being horrible and the fact that it went on for ages. Sheepherders won with a double gutbuster. And then brace yourselves for this one, folks. A Road Warriors promo where we all wonder how many cock jokes were about to be delivered. Would we hear Hawk talk about getting hard? These are all the riveting questions we're anticipating on this family-friendly programming. Well, first, Animal did a promo, and he was relatively PG per Road Warrior standards. He explained that when it comes to the bunkhouse cage match, he does not care about anything inside, or he doesn't care anything aside from winning the $500,000. He doesn't care about friends, doesn't care about tag partners. It's all about getting the W. He also compared New York to Chicago by saying they're both very violent cities. Word. So Hawk. Oh dear God, Hawk. This promo. Well, for starters, let's get the good news out of the way first. He did not make any blatant penis jokes. I was waiting for it. But he didn't go there this time. Instead, he cut a promo on Ric Flair, indicating that he was going to use his size and brain power to outperform Flair in the Nassau Coliseum. Brain power. He said that while Flair's out here saying he's dying to get in the ring with Hawk, the fact of the matter is he'll be dying to get out of the ring after Hawk is through with him. And then he proceeded to close his promo with the following popcorn fart go home line. If they were to bet $1,000 and Hawk lost, he wouldn't pay up. But if Flair lost, Hawk would keep the money anyway. I don't know how to respond to that. That was such an illogical haphazard, nonsensical, contradictory thought. I can't tell if that was supposed to be Hawk attempting to outsmart me with his alleged brain power, or if he really indeed was that dumb. If he loses a $1,000 bet, he wouldn't pay. But if he won, he would keep the money anyway, obviously. No shit. No wonder that line went over like a fart in church. What the hell was that supposed to mean? I listened back to it like 5 times. I could not figure out what the hell I was supposed to take away from that. Hawk broke me. He used his brain power to turn my brain off. The gears completely stopped. The illogic was too much to bear. Genius. So then we came back for a little bit of reconciliation. It's Dick Murdoch and Stan Lane versus 2 completely random job guys whose names I didn't even bother to write down. They were on screen for like 3 seconds. And I should also note they were so generic, it never even registered to me. Like they were there, they were gone, and I was like, huh. Yeah, I completely forgot. I remember one of the guys, his last name was Cruz. No, it wasn't Art Cruz. Nor was it Ted Cruz. Although that would have been fantastic. I'd have paid to see Dick Murdoch beat up Ted Cruz in a match. That'd be kind of fun. So this is a pretty glorious squash. You know, on top of the fact that both the job guys were utterly rotten, Murdoch's out there just bashing these guys' face in with folding chairs. Like Cornette comically yelling for Murdoch to be careful around the tech equipment. Elsewise, they'd have to pay for the damages. These guys just totally didn't give a fuck. And it did lead to a great moment toward the end where JR tells Corny to control his man by either offering him milk or a beer, whatever calms him down. And on top of Murdoch getting the win with the brainbuster, it was particularly funny in slow-mo watching as the job guy was helplessly dangling in the air, just flopping around like a fish. Meanwhile, Murdoch's desperately trying to hold this guy up to prevent himself from, dropping him on his fucking neck. Okay, seriously, people, it's not that hard. Keep your legs straight whenever you're taking a move like that. Whether it's a delayed vertical or a pile driver, don't bend your knees. It will not end well. So then we cut to ringside with Crockett and Dusty, where we had the biggest gaping plot hole on the entire show by a country mile. As David goes, Dusty, that man in the ring right there just a few minutes ago, Dick Murdoch, he wants your head on a silver platter. He's got that open bounty to hunt you down. To which Dusty calmly begins explaining that he's a wanted man in Crockett Promotions because he's got the gold, and everybody wants a shot at the U.S. title, but he's not hard to find. If the Midnights want Dusty, they can come and get him. And of course, I'm thinking the obvious. Hold on a sec. Dick Murdoch, Jim Cornette, and Stan Lane were in the ring not just 5 seconds prior to this interview with Dusty. Where the fuck did they go? Why were they not immediately chasing after Dusty? They had a 3-on-1 advantage. Okay, fine. 2.5. They keep coming out on television every week and saying, we've got the open contract to end Dusty's career whenever we want. Okay. He's standing right there. What are we waiting for? An invitation? Oh, in fact, Dusty did. He invited them to come over there and fight him. So where were they? The rest of this I hardly paid attention to. Poor bunkhouse plugs. Dusty's the bull of the woods, 2-time bunkhouse champion, whatever. And he wants to take home the $500,000 on behalf of his family and friends. Then we came back for a Paul Jones Army promo. Jones talked about how his men are the odds in favor to win because he's got 3 of his men inside the cage match of the bunkhouse. Meanwhile, there's only 1 Road Warrior, and I think that was it, right? Well, I guess you got Dusty in there, too. And, they plugged the bench press contest in the 30th again. Ivan said his men are ready. Yeah, I really didn't get much else out of this. It was kind of funny hearing Paul and Ivan cut the promo for their guys, but the entire time they're talking, only a quarter inch of their heads are actually in the frame. Most of the time they're completely shielded by the Warlord and the Barbarian standing right in front of them. It was good camera work. But, yeah, then we went back to the ring for Arn Anderson and George South, right at the top of hour 2. I thought it was a pretty fun little match. JJ's approval on the floor to Arn's offense was mildly entertaining. Didn't go all that long, but it wasn't a total one-sided beatdown either. The one thing JR is always good at is putting over the in-ring talent of everybody involved in the match. Even the lesser important guys. We also know George South wasn't a ham and egger. He was at least somebody they valued as an underneath talent. So, JR was sure to mention that. Didn't completely throw him under the bus. But Arn eventually won with the Gourd Buster. Then we cut to ringside for a JJ Arn promo. And once again, JJ's building up the confidence in his men. Talking about the fact that the $500,000 is no issue for the Horsemen to divvy up amongst themselves. Because everybody's on the same page financially. Meanwhile, Arn's talking about the fact that Luger's got all kinds of things going in his favor. He's got the body, the athleticism, the genetics, and the talent. But what he doesn't have is relationships. He doesn't have a group of men watching his back. When it comes to the bunkhouse match, Luger's going to be swimming up Schitt's Creek without a paddle. No one to bail him out. When it comes to the cage match, while Luger's spending all his time worrying about training in the gym and lifting heavy weights, the Horsemen are going to be focused on winning the money and taking home the bank. Albeit it was not the greatest delivery from Double A this week. He was kind of bumbling over himself here. Still a fantastic promo. Even Double A at 75% can still outclass the majority of the people cutting promos at this time. Again, though, more pay-per-view hype, and really not much else to say about it. Then we had Ron Garvin versus Andrew Bellamy, or Belmy. I believe JR and Tony just referred to him as Gene Ligon. So I had no idea what was going on here. Gene Ligon actually sounded familiar, as opposed to Andrew Belmy or Belmy. No idea where they got that name from. I'd almost forgotten Ronnie Garvin existed on this program. That is how out of sight, out of mind he's been since he lost the world title back to Ric Flair at Starrcade. He's, hate to say it, just a dude. All over again. We're right back to late 85, early 1986 vibes with Garvin. Now, still, this is pretty great. Ronnie did some stretching, some quick mat work, all of which was relatively boring at first. And then, completely at random in this match, Gene decided he was going to engage in a slap fight with Ron Garvin. And boy, was that a royal mistake. As Ronnie proceeded to fire back, both men had an open palm slap exchange, just back and forth. Crowd was going nuts for it. And then finally, after Ron dropped Ligon and started pounding away on him, Ligon goes to do a sunset flip, which Garvin counters by punching Ligon directly in the face. And then he does the Garvin stomp sequence, where we see Garvin drive his boot directly into Ligon's face as hard as humanly possible. And, well, I can assure you this man was dead in more ways than one. The lesson to be had in all this: do not engage in fisticuffs with Ron Garvin. Have we not learned after all these years? It does not end well. And Gene Ligon learned the hard way. From there, we cut to the Midnights at ringside for a promo. After Corny mentioned the towns and all the various venues his men were going to be coming in the next 24 hours, he then pulled out some receipts and started asking Dickie why he was spending some bounty money on drinks and saloon visits. To which Murdoch responds by going, "My ranchers were a little thirsty." Huh. For the record, people, $224 for a taste test at a saloon in 1988. It's a lot of drinking. We also had a plug for a barbed wire match between Murdoch and Nikita for one of the upcoming house show events. Should have wrote down the town that was being advertised for. Someplace in Texas. Dick Murdoch country. Speaking of Murdoch, he chimed in here with some comments. In addition to him promising to take out Ron Garvin and Dusty Rhodes, and all the other babyfaces for that matter, he also vowed that he was going to wrap some barbed wire around Nikita and squeeze it until his eyeballs popped. Gross. This was also one of those deals where the longer the promo went, the more incomprehensible Dick Murdoch became because he just kept getting louder and louder. To the point where eventually all we saw on Murdoch's face was spit and foam forming, while David Crockett was desperately trying to play keep away and not get any on him. A magnificent segment. But from there, came back for the big showdown this week, our TV main event. And what a main event it was. For the Western States Heritage Championship, the only meaningful title defense I think we've ever seen from the moment Barry actually won that fucking thing like 8 months ago. It's Barry versus Tully. And boy, there's a lot you can say about this just from a future storyline standpoint, especially with what's coming in the next few weeks. When it comes to the match, though, and we'll go over the details of everything because there's a lot to unpack here, but let me just say, before we dive into everything, when people ask questions like, man, what happened to the good old classic professional wrestling? Or what's the kind of thing missing in today's product that we used to get 30, 40, 50 plus years ago? They might seem like narrow-minded questions for a lot of younger fans that didn't grow up watching during this hotter period in the business. But man, I'm sorry to be so blunt about it, but man, wrestling sucks now compared to what we used to get back in the day, man. Like this match right here, this is professional wrestling. And it's not just about the talent involved, because that kind of goes without saying. But when you watch a damn near 30-minute classic like this, you see all the particulars of how the match is laid out, where and how things are done, when they're done in the match, why they're done a certain way. You can't even compare that to something like what you would see in today's product. This is everything you could possibly ask for in a match. Two great athletes. You get the white meat crowd fan favorite babyface going up against the conniving, lying, cheating heel, doing anything to take shortcuts and get away with anything he can. You know, you get the great stuff early on where Tully's playing chicken and trying to run from Barry any chance he gets. Like anytime Tully would cut Barry off, he couldn't keep the momentum going because Barry would just be right there to keep outclassing him. Even the subtle angles, like Tully trying to use JJ's dress shoe to hit Barry behind the ref's back. But then Barry caught him in the act before Tully could swing. So, you know, when Tommy turned around and saw Tully with the shoe, you know, Tully throws a fit and then kicks the bottom rope out of frustration. It's like, fuck, I missed my chance. And it finally boils over to the point where after Tully gives Barry the hip toss, which inadvertently took down Tommy Young for a few minutes, we see the heels immediately jump on Barry like a pack of wild dogs. They end up wrapping Barry's leg around the ring post so Tully could use a chair to take out the left knee. And at this point, as they go into their break spot, Tully's found the weak point on Barry. So he's working over that knee as a target. It's several minutes of Barry selling the knee. Tully's applying pressure and doing everything to stay on him. You get those momentary glimpses of hope where you think, Barry's going to muster up some offense. But then the leg would give out on him, prevents him from gaining control, and you're like, shoot. And they try to break up the various points in this match by cutting to Luger, who was watching the match with David at the interview station. Admittedly, the inset Luger promos were kind of annoying. I get what they were going for here, trying to make it seem like more of a sporting event. I thought it was a little too disrupting. I just kind of wanted to watch the match. But they had to keep zooming the camera shot to Luger so they could show him in the frame, and I don't know. It just kind of distracted from the action, so I wasn't a fan of that part. But again, the timing, the pacing of the match, it's impeccable. As David keeps announcing the key timestamps in the match, the fans are staying engaged, cheering for Barry to keep fighting and staying alive. And as we lead up to the final few minutes, we get the spot where Barry's able to finally catch Tully with a lariat. But as he goes for the pin, JJ runs over from off camera and he rings the timekeeper bell. And at that point, they'd gone down to like the last 90 seconds or so. So Tommy Young, of course, figuring, well, I heard the bell, so obviously the match is over. Meanwhile, Luger and the announcers are trying to draw Young's attention to the fact that, JJ rang the bell, man. This match should still be going on. So they spent a few minutes re-airing the footage to show what happened. And, it's all distraction tactics, so Tully can try to sneak in and cradle Barry from behind. But then Luger dives in, and he stops Tommy's count. And from that point, it's all pandemonium and bedlam breaking loose. You get the Horsemen out there stomping a mud hole in Luger and Barry. You got fans trying to hit the ring. Everybody's pelting the ring with garbage, screaming to the top of their lungs. Like, I'm not kidding you. They nearly started a fucking riot in this building. That is how electric the room was. And again, I hate to keep doing the compare and contrast thing, but you don't see stuff like this in wrestling anymore. These wild, chaotic brawl sequences where everybody in the arena is on their feet yelling and screeching. JR and his patented panic-stricken tone going, "It's bedlam in here. We gotta get somebody. Folks, stay with us. It's crazy." Man, if I could hug and shake the hand of every individual in this match, I would. Beautiful segment. Excellent. One of my favorite NWA Crockett moments I've seen in a long time on the Superstation. Like, this one's right up there with that Midnights versus Ronnie Garvin, Barry Windham tournament final match from 87, or Ric Flair versus Ricky Morton on the Superstation at the tail end of 85. Maybe that was early 86. I can't remember off the top of my head. But like that level of awesomeness, I might go back and rewatch the whole thing again from start to finish if I have some free time this week. That's how good it was, though. And again, man, this all predates the Barry Windham heel turn and the alignment with the Horsemen. You know, right now they weren't even hinting at that being a possibility. You know, we did, however, get confirmation from Barry in the post-match here, after Luger extended the olive branch to apologize to Barry for everything from the previous year. Barry goes, "Luger, there's a contract for a match on the 6th of February in Charlotte. You need a tag partner to wrestle Arn and Flair. I'm your man, brother." Well, if only he knew ahead of time. But holy cow, what a fucking match. What a fucking segment. It's like we're right back in 86 all over again. This had that level of enthusiasm when it was all said and done. And again, keep that date in the back of your mind. February 6th, Charlotte Coliseum. Luger and Barry teaming up to challenge Ric Flair and Arn Anderson. Yeah, what could possibly go wrong there? So, yeah, the takeaway from this, go watch the main event. However you can get your hands on it, I don't care. Buy it, search it, pirate it. Whatever you have to do to obtain a copy of it. It'll be worth it, trust me. That alone would be worth the price of admission. That's the kind of match that should have been on that Bunkhouse 88 pay-per-view. Just a great closing 30 minutes of the show. Hot angle to close everything out, too. You know, some good story teasers for future direction in weeks to come. This is the kind of thing the NWA's needed for a long time. Pretty much since the summer of 87 during the Bash Tour. Some honest-to-God hot angles and things we can sink our teeth into on these syndicated shows. Like, we've had a few pockets of greatness here and there, but man, nothing like this. Now, this will go down in the record book. When we look back at 88, I will not forget the Tully Blanchard Barry Windham TV match from the Richmond Coliseum. And I hope the fans won't either. So, moving to Mid-South television. By the way, I love this quick little bio description on the Peacock Network. They always have that little blip to explain what's going on for that particular episode. This one reads, "Junkyard Dog returns, but suddenly, Stagger Lee is nowhere to be found." That is oddly suspicious. I wonder where Stagger was. Maybe he missed his plane flight. Now, of course, with all the winks and nods happening at the camera from Bill Watts and Boyd Pierce over the last few months, is it even worth trying to conceal the mystery at this point? Even a person with low-functioning IQ could figure that one out. It was funny, though, as we go to Boyd and Paul Bosch at the commentary desk this week. You know, they're obviously mentioning the fact that Stagger Lee hasn't arrived yet, although he was scheduled to be at the Irish McNeil Boys Club. And while Boyd's talking about all the extenuating circumstances that prevent guys from making their scheduled appearances, be it weather, car troubles, what have you, Paul Bosch is there talking about how it's the kind of thing that gives promoters ulcers when they have to rearrange cards at the last minute to make up for missing parties. Of course, I'm like, so Paul's clearly indicating that he doesn't give a fuck about the well-being of the talents. No, he's more focused on his card getting screwed up. Because he's a businessman first. It was also good hearing him use the word ulcer. Just letting you know that every promoter in the business at this point was over the age of 70. I'm kidding, obviously. What a boomer term to use. So as noted, Bill Watts was not on commentary this week. He was actually handling the interviews. And we cut to Watts, who was standing at ringside with JYD. And they briefly touch on the Stagger situation, but quickly turned the conversation over to JYD's return, now that the 90-day suspension is up. And Dog's talking about the fact that he's not in the best physical shape, but he's still JYD. So he's got his missions to attend to in Midsouth. I was going to make a comment about the physical conditioning of the Dog, but on second thought, I think I'll save that conversation for later on in 84. We'll do some side-by-side comparisons later on. But they mostly used this to set up the clip they had in the can. It is a Mid-South tag match going all the way back to last year, with JYD and Ernie Ladd versus one of the Assassins, and I believe Hangman Harris, who we've already established was Black Bart. And while the match was in progress, Ted DiBiase was out on the floor with a notepad, doing some scouting. And that was primarily the story of the match. It eventually broke down with all the usual chaos at ringside, starting with the Assassin loading up the mask with a gimmick, and then giving Dog the illegal shot behind the ref's back. And while that was going on, Dog ended up getting knocked out on the floor so DiBiase could go over and taunt him. Meanwhile, on the other side of the ring, Alfred Neely got bumped through the middle rope while trying to break up a fight with Ernie. And there was a lot of shit going on here at the end. Kind of hard to keep track of everything. I remember the grappler got involved at one point and tried to interfere, but that did not go according to plan. The main point here was Dog establishing that he's got beef to settle with DiBiase, but he also wants to reclaim the North American title, since Stagger was the one that took the title off DiBiase in JYD's absence. Friend or foe, Dog is coming for that title. He does not care who the defending champion is. So this is all good plot development. And I like how they're still connecting Dog and Stagger's relationship. Even going so far as to tease the idea of them actually standing across the ring from one another. More open-ended questions. But a really good open to the show this week. Then we had our first match on the show. It's Marty Lundy and Tom Renesto Jr. versus Tim Horner and Art Cruz. Kind of an interesting matchup. All four of these guys have primarily been used as underneath guys for most of the main event talents. And now we're actually seeing them get a bit of a showcase here. Of course, the whole match was a Marty Lundy showcase. Tim Horner made a good fiery babyface comeback at the end, but all eyes were on Double A here. He was the star pupil, so to speak. Match didn't get a whole lot of time. I thought the wrong person won. Even though Marty didn't do the job here, which was the right call, I still would have put the heels over. But I get Horner as a guy they've been kind of using as an underneath babyface. They saw it more of a way to give him a TV win. They did the usual four-way breakdown at the end to set up Horner giving Renesto the Thez press off the ropes for the 3. Solid match. Nothing much more to say about it aside from the standard comments I've been making about Double A for the last few months. He was the man. And then we came back from break for our weekly Mr. Wrestling 2's a Badass video clip. Here we are recounting the Houston video feed with the Wrestling 2 Tully Blanchard match. And the story here being the continual development of guys going after 2's mask. And they're always sure to bring up the fact that Wrestling 2's a professional. He will always wrestle a clean, sportsmanlike match, right up until the point someone goes to the mask. And then it's all hands on deck. And, Boyd and Paul kind of set that up beforehand. 2 actually got disqualified in that match with Tully. because he had gotten physical with the referee and refused to adhere to the regulations of the match. Of course, no one gave a shit, because all they saw was a bloody Tully getting massacred by Wrestling 2, like thrown around like a rag doll, blood spewing from his face. It legitimately is like one of the most badass clips I've ever seen from Wrestling 2. Probably the one and only time I can ever recall a time where I could see Tully Blanchard as the victim. Yeah, most of the time it's him bullying people around and blooding them up. Not here. So yeah, that was pretty great. And we've seen that clip a few times by now, but Paul Bosch specifically wanted Boyd's input for reasons. I can all but confirm Boyd Pierce did not feel sympathy for Tully Blanchard. And staying on the subject of 2 for a moment, we had a little more story progression in the ongoing Mystery Stalker storyline. Yeah, things had kind of died down once Kamala and Skandar Akbar got physical with Wrestling 2 and then laid him out some odd weeks back. But now this individual has been sending Wrestling 2 some more threatening letters and symbols. This time, it's a handwritten note that reads, "You're nothing without your knee, Wrestling 2," followed with a plastic doll with a wrapped knee. It also had a Wrestling 2 mask on, just to rub the heat in more. So it appears that whoever this stalker is, he is back on the prowl. And now Wrestling 2 is fed up to the point where he is now willing to dish out $1,000 of his own money to have somebody bring this man's head to him on a silver platter. He wants answers. He's tired of the games, tired of the ominous threats. Now he's out for blood. So we'll see if this man or men have the guts to confront Wrestling 2. From there, we had Hacksaw Duggan with 2 G's versus Buddy Landell. Still got to make sure we clarify that Duggan is spelled with 2 G's. The greatest inside rib in Midsouth from 82 to 83. Both the mispronouncing and misspelling of Hacksaw Duggan. Now, really not much to say here. Duggan went over with a spear tackle in about 90 seconds. I did enjoy Paul Bosch desperately yet utterly failed to explain how Hacksaw Duggan is very much like a modern, quote, man who tries to be like the tough men from previous eras. I honestly have no idea what the hell that was supposed to mean, much less try to figure out what he was referencing or who. I imagine Bill Watts was among them. Couldn't he have just said, tough guy? Why do you have to get all word salad-y? Yeah, Paul Bosch was not a very good commentator, as you've probably been able to tell by the several guest color appearances he's made on these shows. Great promoter. Terrible ring announcer. So then, right before the next match, we had a brief Ted DiBiase ringside rant where he got to vent his frustrations about not getting to wrestle Stagger Lee for the North American Championship today. Since Stagger is unable to make the show, DiBiase's match will now be changed to a tag match with Matt Bourne. And as you'd probably imagine, DiBiase was pretty hot about that change from matchmaker Grizzly Smith. He begins by going off on a tirade about how if he was still the North American champ and he no-showed a TV taping, he'd have been stripped of the belt and run out of the territory. He's talking about all this conspiracy cover-up going on with JYD and Stagger Lee. The fact that he revealed who Stagger Lee was back in Houston, but all the cameramen mysteriously fell asleep at the wheel and they didn't capture the moment on film. And likewise, the announcers turned a blind eye to it. Of course, Bill Watts, after having heard this entire 3-minute tirade, simply looks at DiBiase at the end and goes, I'll take your issues up with Grizzly. That's all I got for you. And yet again, Boyd Pierce, Bill Watts, Paul Bosch, they're all playing dumb about the Stagger situation. It's funny, Boyd's even like, yeah, there's that Ted DiBiase drumming up conspiracy theories again. What a troubled soul. The show's fucking brilliant. So then we had Kelly Kiniski versus Tony Torres. And I know what you're thinking. Oh boy. A Kelly Kiniski match. How much cock did it actually blow? No. It was not a complete blowjob. Still wasn't any good. And Tony Torres was probably not the best opponent to feed for Kiniski's offense. The only thing that visibly looked rotten here was the finish, and it was more so the setup, as Kiniski goes to Irish whip Torres toward the ropes, and Torres basically comes off the ropes with his back still turned to Kiniski. At the same time, Kiniski's trying to run toward him to give him a knee lift. I swear to God, it looked like two baby fawns with broken legs on an ice rink. And then Kiniski just gave him a backdrop and pinned him. For approximately 1 minute and 50 seconds, the match was blah. The last 10 seconds were Botchamania worthy. And all these months later, having done all those Dallas reviews in World Class and now a handful of these Mid-South shows, I think I'm starting to see why Kiniski only lasted about 7 years in this sport. He was not very good. And then we came back for the rescheduled tag match. It is Ted DiBiase and Matt Bourne going up against Don Bass and Joe Stark in the Fuck You DiBiase segment of the show. Well, Stagger Lee's not here. We can't have that sanctioned title match like we were planning. So, here, Ted. Go wrestle these two job guys. Now, let me throw a caveat on there. I'm not trying to throw shade at Don Bass. I know Ron and Don Bass were a critically acclaimed tag team in like the early 70s. He also had a very successful career in Memphis doing some work as a masked heel. But, you know, in the context of where he was in the pecking order in Mid-South, I mean, he was a job guy, plain and simple. So here in this replacement match for DiBiase on the card, he and Bourne go out there. They wrestle for about 1 minute, at which point DiBiase catches Bass off the ropes for a power slam and the subsequent 3 count. Good buffer match. Probably not the same level of competition DiBiase would have had going up against a Stagger Lee, but what can you do? And, you know, since we were on a sinking ship by this point in the program, with about 5 minutes left of airtime, why not ram that fucking Titanic right into the iceberg with this horrific fucking match? Tony Atlas versus Tug Taylor. Oh my God. When I saw the graphic for this thing before the break, I just started rubbing my hands together, just waiting for that incoming train wreck. Because I knew it was going to be brutal. And was it ever? I was trying to figure out what the worst spot was here. There was so much to choose from. How about the hip toss spot out of the corner where Tug couldn't even elevate himself into the air to take a flip bump? So he basically just rolled onto his side. That was glorious. Or how about the multiple collar and elbow lockups where both men were just kind of jockeying for position, clearly blown up and trying to call spots because they were totally lost with what they were supposed to do. At the point Atlas had Taylor in the sleeper hold, some of the fans in the upper bleachers were so over this match, they actually began a "take me out to the ball game" chant, which actually popped a good portion of the crowd. Because I think everybody figured at this point, yep, there's no saving this one. End it now and move on before our eyes bleed. I particularly love the popcorn finish here, or the popcorn fart finish, I should say, as Atlas goes to release a sleeper on Taylor, completely at random. Referee never called for the bell. Taylor is laying there motionless, and Farrar is looking, and he's looking, and he's observing the lifeless dead body of Tug Taylor. And then finally he goes, "All right, cool, he's deceased. Ring the bell." And it takes Boyd approximately 5 whole seconds to finally ring the fucking bell from the announce desk. Like, Ferrara keeps waving at him like, dude, the bell? Ring. Match over. And finally Boyd caught on to it. I think Ferrara gave this poor man the mercy treatment. Easily what had to be the worst match of 1983. Is there a closer candidate? God, I'd have to go back and work my way through the world-class library just to try to recall a match from 83 that came anywhere close to this match. I don't think I could find a worse one. The Missing Link never had a 2-minute squash this bad. Killer Khan never had a 2-minute squash this bad. Buck fucking Zumhoff never had a 2-minute squash as bad. Beyond putrid. Oh, by the way, hell of a time to put Chavo Sr. out there as the fill-in color guy. He was probably clenching his teeth watching this. Of all the matches for them to put me out there for. I'd have been pissed too. But, on the other hand, I guess he was kind of needed so he could comment about Gino Hernandez. To be honest, I don't really even know what he was saying for half of the promo. He was fumbling over his words for like 90% of it. But I think his main point was calling out Gino as a coward and saying that he came to Mid-South to handle business, not just with Gino, but to also address some outstanding issues with the Rat Pack, of which he'll get the chance next week when he wrestles Matt Bourne. So there was a purpose for Chavo to be in the hot seat. They just made him suffer through a Tony Atlas match to get there. Maybe that's why he was flustered. He was so mesmerized by how bad the match was, he was lost for words. Sure, we'll go with that theory. Relative joking aside, this is a pretty fun episode. A lot of story development on this one. Despite the lack of heavy angles or mass beatdowns. A lot of the physicality was put on the back burner in substitution for promos. But it worked. They addressed the JYD Stagger Lee stuff. Wrestling 2 is still battling the demons of this mystery admirer. Chavo's got some issues to settle with Gino. Yeah, a lot of moving parts on this show, but again, everything ties together so well. We're still only like 3 or 4 weeks into the new year. And we're only scratching the surface of what's to come throughout 83. For now, though, we'll move on to this world-class episode from this week in history. Whatever the day was. Do I even bother mentioning dates anymore? I should. I'm terrible at tracking them, though. Oh, we're definitely in 1985. That I know for sure. And we're a few weeks in now. Things are, I'd say, going moderately well. The big thing happening right now is the change of guard with a lot of the new personnel showing up on the card. We have seen a lot of roster rotation in the last few months. And last week was kind of the start of their new taping block for the month of January. I would say that was a lot like the status quo for a lot of world-class shows. Stuff happened. The show existed. Not really all that memorable. This week, however, they really stepped their game up and moved things along in the right direction. We began our show with a one-man gang match. Or as Mark Lorenz stated here, nonchalantly during his ring intros, an obviously dangerous man walking in front of me. Yes, clearly. The wild man swinging a chain around in several different directions. Yes, I can confirm he was quite dangerous and unhinged. But we had to make sure we announced the weight and hometown, just so the people know. So after essentially breaking the fourth wall and not even being ashamed about it, they fed Shawn Michaels to the behemoth man this week. This was the moment Shawn realized, when I become a huge star a decade from now, I refuse to work and cooperate with big men. Yeah, ask Vader how that went. Well, actually, you can't ask Vader because, oh, never mind. So yeah, gang pretty much massacred Shawn here. Beat him in about a minute. Nearly decapitated him with a lariat at the very end, and then killed him with a running splash. It is the most selling for a big man I think I've ever seen Shawn Michaels do in his entire career. So props to him. And then after that, we came back for a Midnight Express pre-match promo. They were scheduled for their title rematch this week with the Fantastics. And this was the moment of truth right here. I had to test my confirmation bias a little bit. Would Bill Mercer be a better snarky interviewer than David Crockett? I still think David's better, but I did like some of the back and forth banter here with him and Jim Cornette. You know, in terms of the actual locker room promo, it was sort of a way for Cornette to reacquaint the fans with Bobby and Dennis. But of course, we've been doing all the Crockett TV reviews for the last 3 years, so I mean, we know pretty much everything there is to know about the backgrounds of Bobby, Dennis, and Stan. It was kind of interesting, though, seeing Cornette in a lot of his previous Midsouth attire for this segment. Like, the one thing he dropped later on in his career when he went to work for Crockett were the finger rings. But I remember he wore those in Midsouth for the first few months he was there. Didn't expect him to have those same rings here in World Class, too. Forgot all about that. He was also moderately tame here in comparison to most of his TBS promos. You know, he was still the regular, usual snide JC we've all come to know and love. But he wasn't screaming from the rooftops every line. You know, just putting over the Midnights as the best tag team in the world. You know, explains how he came across getting to work with them, thanks to Mama Cornette's money. And Cornette wanted to work with the best of the best. And if there's one thing money can buy, it is good professional tag teams. But that's kind of all there was to the promo. Cornette told Mercer to dress better next time, which was kind of funny. Mercer just goes, "I'll try." Dennis was also sporting a nice shiner here, right under the left eye. Probably explain why he was wearing the shades during his promo, but it was definitely noticeable. From there, we came back for the tag belt. It is the Reunion Arena American Tag Title rematch between the Midnight Express and the Fantastics. Rogers and Fulton, who were, quote, taking their time getting molested by the ladies before entering the ring. That was a more boorish way of Mark Lorenz saying the Fantastics are ladies' men. So, Mercer actually mentioned this during Corny's interview, When we talked about the first match from Reunion Arena, that was the Christmas Star Wars match, the Fantastics actually retained the titles against the Midnights clean. So this was a circumstance where Cornette's trying to fire Bobby and Dennis up from the get-go, telling him he wants the belts to come home with the Midnights tonight. No excuses. Now, of course, psychology 101 in wrestling. What usually happens in a match where you have the babyfaces dominating 90% of the action? Well, not always. Most of the time. We'll say 99.99% of the time. It's the heels that wind up going over somehow. That's at least how my lizard brain operates after having watched this product for 30-odd something years. So, I mean, again, man, it's the Midnights and the Fantastics. Talked about it the first time we discussed the Reunion Arena match. It's like calling Flair versus Sting. They've had I don't know how many hundreds of matches over the years. It's a great match every single time. That kind of goes without saying. But my God, dude. I forgot just how much fucking heat these Midnight's Fantastics matches had in the Dallas and Louisiana area. These people, I mean, they lived and died by the Fantastics here. Like any single time Bobby Fulton and Tommy Rogers had things under control, like every single one of these fans were on their feet cheering and applauding these guys. Women literally screaming their heads off the entire time. And vice versa, anytime you had Bobby Eaton and Dennis Condrey on offense. God, I was afraid the fans were going to hit the ring just watching them take down the Fantastics with a fucking headlock. Seriously, that's how much heat these matches had. And it's 17 minutes and 21 seconds. There wasn't 1 second in this match where the fans weren't screaming or crying or chanting or some combination of the three. It was almost unreal. And in terms of the stuff they were doing in the match, it's basic tag team shit. You had the traditional babyface flurry, great series of offense from Fulton and Rogers where they were cutting off the Midnights at every turn. Cornette's out on the floor practically having a conniption. And finally when the Midnights cut off the Fantastics and get their chance to work them over, it's all the typical Eaton Condrey double team work. Always doing a great job keeping David Manning out of position when he misses the blatant 2-on-1 attacks. Even the crowd hysterics couldn't help that. And the finish is perfect. It's Bobby Fulton getting the hot tag after they spent several minutes working over Rogers. The Midnights eventually hit the ring to create a 4-way pandemonium sequence. While David's trying to break up the scuffle with Condrey and Fulton, Eaton and Rogers go to set up the bridging pin spot near the ropes. But Cornette whacks Rogers with a gimmick tennis racket and then knocks him out. So Eaton can steal the pin while Condrey is restraining Fulton. And the crowd's literally reaching over security at that point to try to grab the Midnights by the throat. God, they were so pissed. Again, it's one of those environments where every time I hear Cornette recount those crazy fan stories on his podcast, he's not exaggerating. It really was that level of hostility at the time. Especially anytime the Midnights got one over on the babyfaces. This is how wrestling used to be, though, man. Just a simple fuck the fans finish. Putting those nasty, mean heels over the babyface champions. That alone sent the fans into a feat of rage. That's always going to be something missing from today's product, unfortunately. You just can't artificially create these levels of heat in the business ever again. No way. I mean, you'll have fans boo bad finishes or shit on things they don't like. I mean, that's natural, but you never watch an AEW or a WWE show today and think, man, I hope that heel doesn't go over tonight because these fans are ready to hit the ring and pull out blades if this guy goes over. It's just the reality of where we are today. But yeah, this finish is absolutely fantastic. No pun intended there. Again, these guys had so many matches over the years. Even a mediocre Fantastics Midnights match. Some of the best shit you were ever going to see around that time from an in-ring standpoint. Thumbs up to all this. Also a thumbs up to this Gary Hart promo with Bill Mercer. Yeah, Gary was here to state some of his grievances with the current treatment of his counsel, Chris Adams. Saying Adams is being denied a title shot for the NWA World Heavyweight title is a combination of two things. One, fear from the champion, Ricky Flair. By the way, yes, he did refer to him in this promo as Ricky multiple times. And number two, it's Fritz conspiring against Gary Hart because of their, quote, previous history. Now, there's some insider baseball for you. If you've been following the world-class reviews over the last couple years, I think we all know about the Gary Hart Dallas office drama by now. But Gary Hart was here to impose his solution in making sure Chris doesn't get overlooked in 1985 and that he becomes world champion. And it's not just a solution in terms of coming up with a game plan to get something in writing. Hart indicated that it is the solution. So we will see what those ominous words mean momentarily. As we go into our main event, it's Kerry Von Erich versus Chris Adams. Kerry's opportunity to get a modicum of revenge on behalf of his brother Kevin. And we all know the story there between Kevin and Chris. So Kerry was not going to hold back. And, generally I would say it was a pretty paint-by-numbers Dallas main event. Gary Hart was great on the floor playing cheerleader for Adams and trying to guide him along throughout the match. But I thought Kerry and Chris worked really well together. Pretty solid outing. I thought Adams was going to kill himself trying to do that suicide dive toward the end, where his feet got momentarily caught up in the ropes. It's like, oh dear God. If there was ever a location not to botch a dive spot, it's the venue here where there's nothing but solid concrete on the ground. But really, aside from that one spot, not much to say about it. Kerry wound up going over with the backslide. And then we had the awesome post-match where Gary Hart tried to come in to steal Kerry's thunder by swatting away his arm when he tried to celebrate. So then Kerry just popped him in the mouth and Gary sold it like he was dead. Probably the greatest bump I've ever seen Gary take in his entire career. And of course, while Kerry's got the claw hold applied on the heels here, well, actually, let me try to describe the moment in real time so you can get a general overall picture of what happened. Okay, so Kerry's got Chris and Gary in the claw hold for about 17 hours to years. He's just standing there and standing there and standing there. Gary and Chris are probably thinking, where in the fuck is this idiot right now? We're all looking like jackasses. And then finally, in rolls the one-man gang to beat up Kerry and leave him for dead. I honestly have no idea where gang was running out from in the building. This had to have been a solid 3 to 5 minutes of Kerry waiting for this fucking guy to run down to the ring. Took forever. But, yes, it would appear that this was Gary's solution. The solution was the gang. Nice. A big, mean, ugly muscle that'll handle Chris's dirty work for him. With Gary Hart calling the shots. It's classic pro wrestling right there. And likewise, it also gives the Von Erichs another big heel to feud with in the interim, so it's good. Very much enjoyed this. Even with the gang's run-in that took about 17 years to actually come through in execution. But it did help to round out what was an otherwise really strong episode of World Class. I actually thought this was one of their better offerings in a long time. This is a show I would actually consider rewatching again from start to finish just to kill some time. It was that good. And I haven't been able to say that about a lot of world-class shows in the last 6 to 8 months. But I enjoyed this one. Kind of had that Mid-South vibe to it where there was a good balance between promos and angles and even match quality just to kind of give the show a little bit of flavor. And that's not always the case when it comes to world-class. The one thing I always kind of harp on with these shows is that everything's so dry. And, sometimes they don't hit on all those core areas. A lot of the time they really don't hit on one. But, yeah, I really like the show. Can't say enough good things about it. So, yeah, kind of a grab bag of classic wrestling this week, but them's the breaks sometimes. Ups and downs, ebbs and flows. Keeps us on our toes. And, well, I'll encourage you guys to keep on your toes this weekend because we've got some interesting stuff coming up for Monday. We've got this WWE Royal Rumble Peacock special to talk about. And I think that's on Saturday. So that'll be fun. I can spend Sunday sort of piecing that show together bit by bit. We'll also have Retro NXT and Retro Raw. Yeah, getting back into the swing of things there. I also have to make sure I watch the correct episode because I kind of screwed that up at the end of last year. But I'll make a mental note about it. So thanks everybody for watching. And yeah, come back and check us out on Monday because it'll be a packed show. So take care. Peace out.